I went to the library to return a book, but the woman behind the counter made me want to stay forever. The library was the one place where silence didn't feel empty. Every evening, after long days filled with noise and people talking without meaning much, I'd slip through those tall wooden doors and breathe in the calm. The air always carried the faint scent of paper and dust, mixed with something floral, maybe from the small vase she kept on the counter. I didn't know her name then, only that she moved with a grace that seemed to quiet the world around her. She looked to be in her early 40s, poised, elegant, with chestnut brown hair tied loosely, and glasses that framed eyes soft as candlelight. There was something steady about her presence, like she belonged to another time, the kind of woman who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. I first noticed her watching me from behind the counter as I wandered between aisles. Not in a curious way, more like she was used to recognizing souls that came here to hide. I'd run my fingers along the spines of old poetry books, the leather covers smooth and cool. The tick of the clock echoed faintly through the stillness. Outside, the sun was fading, washing the shelves in gold. When I finally approached the desk, she smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to hold a story of its own. "Looking for something in particular?" she asked, her voice low and unhurried. I hesitated, realizing how little I actually knew what I was looking for. "Maybe something quiet," I said. "Something that doesn't try too hard." Her smile deepened. She studied me for a moment, then turned to a nearby shelf. "Then you might like this one." She pulled out a worn book, Letters to the Lost. The cover was faded, corners bent, the pages yellowed from years of hands before mine. "It's about two people who never meet, but somehow understand each other better than anyone else." She placed it gently in my hands. For a second, our fingers brushed, just a fleeting touch, but enough to send a small pulse through the quiet. Her hands were warm, soft in that delicate way that only came from care. I thanked her, my voice quieter than usual. She nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I sat by the window to read. Outside, dusk deepened into violet. Inside, the only sound was the faint rustle of her moving books, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. Every now and then I'd glance up and find her looking back, not staring, not intrusive, just a brief meeting of eyes, an unspoken acknowledgement that neither of us minded the other's company. By the time I closed the book, the room had thinned of visitors. The clock read 7:30. She was turning off lamps, one by one, until the library glowed in small pools of amber. As I left, she said softly, "You can take your time with that one. It deserves to be read slowly." Something in her tone stayed with me as I stepped into the cool night air. I didn't know why then, but it felt like she'd handed me more than a book. It felt like the beginning of a chapter one hadn't known I was ready to read. A week passed before I went back, though truthfully it felt longer. The book sat on my desk each night, open to different pages, but I never finished it. I told myself I was too busy, too distracted, but the truth was simpler. I wanted a reason to see her again. Returning the book too soon felt like closing something that hadn't fully begun. The library looked the same when I walked in. Rows of quiet shelves, sunlight filtering through tall windows, that faint scent of old pages and lavender polish. But it felt different this time. Familiar, almost comforting. She was at her usual spot behind the counter, sorting a small pile of returns. When she looked up, recognition flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, not curiosity, but something gentler. "You finished it already?" she asked, her tone carrying a smile. I set the book down, shaking my head. "Not quite. I got distracted." She raised an eyebrow, lips curving slightly. "That's a dangerous habit for a reader." I couldn't help but smile. Maybe I didn't want it to end. She laughed softly, a quiet, melodic sound that seemed to ripple through the still air. "Then you'll just have to borrow it again." She opened the front cover, checking the card. "Though technically, you didn't even have to return it yet." "I know," I admitted. "I just thought maybe you'd want to know how far I got." Her eyes lingered on mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then dropped back to the book. She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the edge of a dog-eared section. "This part," she said, pointing. "Most people stop here. It's where the letters start feeling too real. The writer begins to lose his balance." I looked at the page, then back at her. "Is that a warning?" "More of a confession," she said quietly, still not looking up. "Sometimes the right words come too close to what we're afraid to feel." For a moment, the air between us changed, softer, heavier. I watched as she closed the book and slid it toward me again. Our fingers brushed. It wasn't accidental this time. Just the briefest connection, skin against skin, but enough to make my pulse shift. She didn't move her hand away immediately. "You can keep it a while longer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you'll finish it next time." I nodded, unsure if she meant the story or something else entirely. When I left, the sunlight outside had turned to that late afternoon gold that makes everything look touched by memory. I walked slower than usual, the weight of the book familiar in my hands, her scent, something like jasmine and old wood, still faint on its cover. That night I opened it again. The words felt different now. Her voice lingered in every line, and the unfinished story suddenly didn't feel like a flaw. It felt like a promise. I didn't just want to finish the book anymore. I wanted to understand why she wanted me to. That evening, the rain came early, soft, steady, the kind that blurs everything outside into watercolor. I hadn't planned to visit the library again so soon, but the thought of her, alone among the quiet aisles, closing up while the storm murmured outside, drew me there. The lights inside glowed amber through the rain-slick glass. When I stepped in, the chime above the door gave a soft ring, and she looked up from behind the counter. Her hair was loose tonight, brushing her shoulders in waves that caught the light. She smiled, not surprised, almost as if she'd been expecting me. "You're late," she said gently. "We close in 10 minutes. "Then I'll read fast," I replied, shaking the rain from my jacket. She laughed, setting aside the stack of books she'd been sorting. "You're welcome to stay a bit longer. I still have inventory to finish." The library was empty except for us. The silence between thunder rumbles felt deeper here, cushioned by the scent of paper and the soft patter of rain against tall windows. I sat at the nearest table, pretending to read while watching her move, the graceful rhythm of someone who's made peace with quiet. After a few minutes, she spoke without looking up. "You always sit near the poetry shelves." "Why?" I thought for a moment. "Because they say what I can't." That made her pause. She glanced up at me, eyes searching, then smiled faintly. "That's what I love about them too." She came over carrying 2 mugs of tea. "I usually save this for myself," she said, handing me one. "But you look like someone who could use warmth." Her fingers brushed mine as I took it. Not a spark this time, but a steadiness. Outside, the storm deepened, wrapping the library in a cocoon of sound. We talked for hours about small things at first. Favorite books, old music, how the town felt slower than the rest of the world. But slowly, the conversation deepened, like a tide creeping higher. She told me she'd worked here for 15 years, that she'd once wanted to travel but never did. "It's strange," she said softly, stirring her tea. "You spend your life surrounded by stories about people who chase everything they want, and somehow, you end up staying in one place." Her voice carried a hint of something fragile. Not regret exactly, but memory. I wanted to tell her she hadn't missed her chance, that her calm presence already changed lives, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I said, "Maybe the right story found its way here to wait for you." She met my gaze, a small, knowing smile forming, the kind that says more than gratitude. "And maybe you're the one who brought it in." The clock struck 8. She didn't move to turn off the lights. We sat there in the golden stillness, the rain still whispering, 2 people who had spent their lives reading about connection, and were only now learning how it truly felt. In that moment, the library didn't feel like a building anymore. It felt like a secret neither of us wanted to leave. The next time I walked into the library, she wasn't at the front desk. For a moment, the silence felt different, too still, as if her absence had drained the warmth from the room. I waited, pretending to browse the new arrivals until I saw her emerge from the back room, carrying a stack of books. Her smile when she saw me was quiet but unmistakably real, the kind that starts in the eyes before it reaches the lips. "You came back," she said, setting the books down. "I wasn't done reading," I replied, though we both knew I wasn't talking about the pages. She tilted her head, half amused, half flustered. "Well, let's see what you left unfinished then." I handed her the same book, Letters to the Lost. When she opened it, something small slipped out and fluttered onto the counter. I reached for it at the same time she did. It was a piece of cream-colored paper folded twice, a little worn at the edges. She looked down, then back at me, a quiet pause hanging between us. I unfolded it. In neat, slanted handwriting, hers was a single line. "We find each other between the lines we never meant to write." For a second, I didn't know what to say. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The words carried her voice, her calmness, her quiet courage. I looked up, but she was already moving toward a nearby shelf, pretending to arrange books that didn't need arranging. "Was this meant for me?" I asked softly. She turned, feigning thought. "Maybe. Or maybe it just stayed behind from someone else's story." Her attempt to sound casual didn't quite hold. There was color in her cheeks now, a subtle pink rising beneath the lamplight. She avoided my gaze, but her fingers kept brushing the edge of the counter, restless. I stepped closer. "You write like someone who knows what it's like to mean something and say nothing." She smiled then. A small, fragile smile that said, "You understand more than I expected you to." "Books have their secrets," she murmured. "So do people." A soft hum filled the air, the old radiator kicking on, the faint patter of rain outside. But between us, the silence grew warmer, thicker. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to let her know that I'd read between the lines, and understood every word she hadn't spoken. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I folded the note carefully and placed it back inside the book. "Then I'll borrow this again," I said. "Some stories are worth rereading." Her eyes lifted to mine, searching, holding, and for a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to the two of us standing there under the library's soft glow. When I finally left that night, the note still lay tucked inside the book, but its words had already etched themselves into me. She'd written about finding each other between the lines, and somehow I knew we already had. That Friday evening, the sky was already dimming when I reached the library. The clouds hung low, brushed with the faint orange of sunset. I didn't plan to go. I told myself I was only returning the book, but something in me hoped she'd still be there. The town was quiet, shop windows darkening one by one. When I reached the library steps, I noticed the door wasn't locked. The little sign that usually read "closed at 7 o'clock" still hung there, but the light inside was on. I pushed the door open gently. The familiar scent of books and cedar polish greeted me. But there was something else too, a stillness that felt almost intimate. She was there, sitting at one of the reading tables near the back, her hair loosely tied, glasses set aside, a cup of tea beside her and an open book resting in her lap. When she looked up, surprise flickered across her face, and then softened into something warmer. "You're lucky I forgot to lock the door," she said, her voice low, calm. "Or maybe I'm just lucky," I replied, closing the door behind me. She laughed quietly, the sound gentle as the turning of a page. "I was just finishing some returns. The night felt too quiet to go home yet." I walked closer, noticing the book she was reading. A collection of short letters, the same series she'd once recommended to me. "You like reading when it's empty, don't you?" I asked. Her eyes drifted to the shelves around us. "It's peaceful when there's no one left to watch," she said softly. "Except maybe you." The way she said it, without teasing, without hiding, made the air shift. I sat across from her, the wooden chair creaking slightly. The lamp between us threw a warm light over the table, catching strands of her hair that glowed like fine gold. She poured me a cup of tea from her pot without asking, as if it had already been waiting for me. For a while we just sat there, sipping tea and talking about small, quiet things. favorite authors, her first day working there, the way people always leave notes inside books as if the pages will keep their secrets. She told me she used to write poetry once, but hadn't in years. Sometimes, she said, staring into her cup, I think words stopped visiting me when I stopped believing I was worth writing about. Something in my chest tightened. Maybe they're just waiting for you to open the right book again, I said softly. She looked up then, her eyes shimmering in the dim light. Tired, maybe, but alive in a way I hadn't seen before. When I stood to leave, she followed me to the door. The night outside was cool, the air heavy with the scent of rain about to fall. She reached up, adjusting the scarf around my neck. A simple gesture, but her fingers lingered longer than necessary. The warmth of her touch was delicate but steady, like she was memorizing something she didn't want to forget. Good night, she whispered, her voice almost trembling. I nodded, not trusting my words. As I stepped out into the night, the door closed softly behind me. But for the first time, it didn't feel like the library I was leaving. Felt like her. The following week felt strangely heavy. Maybe it was the rain that wouldn't stop, or maybe it was how quiet the library had become. The usual comfort I felt walking through those tall wooden doors now carried something bittersweet, like a melody slowing toward its final note. She was there, as always, sorting through a cart of returned books near the window. The light outside was gray and soft, filtering through the glass in muted tones. She looked different somehow, not sad, but thoughtful, distant. When she turned and saw me, a faint smile crossed her lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. You came back, she said. I always do, I replied, trying to sound light, though something in her expression told me this visit wouldn't be like the others. She gestured for me to sit. I noticed that her desk, usually neat and full of little details, bookmarks, flowers, the silver pen she always used, was half empty. She followed my eyes, then sighed quietly. I'm leaving, she said after a pause, at the end of the month. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. Leaving? As in, the library? She nodded, her hands folding together in front of her. Retiring early, technically. My sister's opening a small shop up north. I thought maybe I'd help her for a while. It's time for a change. Her words were gentle, but they struck deep. The sound of them seemed to blur everything around us. The idea of her, this calm, steady presence, not being here felt wrong, like pulling a bookmark from a story that wasn't finished. I didn't know what to say, so I helped her pack a few things instead. We worked in silence, stacking books, sorting papers, but beneath the quiet, emotion hummed like a low, invisible current. At one point, our hands reached for the same stack of poetry volumes. Our fingers met, and this time, neither of us moved away. Her skin was warm, trembling slightly. I looked up. Her eyes met mine, full of something tender and unguarded. I thought I'd have more time, I said finally. She smiled faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. We always think that, but time doesn't wait for us to be ready. Her words should have felt final, but they didn't. Instead, they stirred something deeper. A quiet ache that had been building since the day I first walked into that library. We stood there, hands still touching over the stack of books, the world narrowing to the warmth between our palms. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, tapping gently against the windows like the sound of a heartbeat. I'll miss this place, she said. I'll miss you, I replied before I could stop myself. She didn't flinch. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment, she looked younger or maybe just freer. Then, instead of answering, she turned back to the shelf, her shoulders rising with a quiet breath. As I helped her close up that evening, neither of us spoke again. But in the silence, everything was understood. That something had changed forever, and no words could name it. When I finally left, I realized her presence lingered not in the library's walls, but in me. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that no amount of distance could unwrite what had begun here. The last day came too soon. The sign on the library door read, "Closing early. Thank you for the memories." The handwriting was hers, neat, graceful, the kind that made even endings look gentle. I stood outside for a moment before going in, trying to gather my thoughts. I'd rehearsed what I might say a dozen times that week, but the moment I saw her inside, all the words dissolved. The library was half empty, boxes stacked near the counter, the shelves missing their familiar fullness. Yet, somehow, the room still felt alive, like her presence had soaked into every corner. She was sitting at the desk, wrapping up the last few books in brown paper, humming softly to herself. When she looked up and saw me, her face lit up in that quiet, unspoken way, a smile that said, "I hoped you'd come." "I wasn't sure you'd make it," she said. "I couldn't not," I replied. "You're the reason I ever started coming here." She gave a soft laugh. "I think you give me too much credit." I shook my head. "No. You gave me something I didn't know I was missing." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the clock filled the stillness, marking each second like a heartbeat. I reached into my bag and placed the old book, Letters to the Lost, on the counter. Its pages had grown softer with time, the cover worn from being held too much. "I wanted to return this before you left," I said. Her gaze lingered on the book, then rose to meet mine. She traced the edge of the cover with her fingertips. "You actually finished it this time?" I smiled faintly. "Every word." She nodded, her voice turning quiet. "Then you know how it ends." "Yes," I said. Two people realized they were never really strangers. They were just waiting for the right silence to find each other. Something in her expression shifted, a tremor of emotion she didn't hide this time. She took a deep breath, closing the book and sliding it gently back toward me. "Then you can return your book," she said softly. "But keep me instead." The words hung between us, simple, unguarded, perfect. My heart stilled for a beat, then surged with warmth I couldn't contain. I stepped closer, the space between us dissolving like breath on glass. She didn't move away. Her eyes glimmered in the golden lamplight, soft but certain. I reached out, hesitating for just a second, then cupped her hand in mine. Her fingers curled around mine with quiet certainty. No pretense, no fear. For a long, silent moment we just stood there. I felt the warmth of her skin, the faint tremor of her breath, the way her thumb traced a small, absent circle on my wrist. Then she leaned forward, resting her forehead lightly against my chest. A gesture so tender it felt like the world exhaled around us. The rain began again outside, gentle and rhythmic. The library lights dimmed as evening settled, wrapping the moment in a soft amber glow. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were wet but shining. "You'll visit?" she asked. I smiled, brushing a stray hair from her cheek. "You're the only story I want to keep reading." She laughed softly through her tears, that quiet, melodic sound I'd never forget. As I walked out that night, the book still in my hands, the library door clicked softly behind me. The sign on the door fluttered in the wind, but inside my chest, nothing felt like an ending anymore. It felt like the first page of something real, written not in ink, but in the quiet language of two hearts finally learning to speak. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in quiet, unexpected love. Revolving hearts, tell me in the comments. Backhand index pointing right, have you ever met someone who felt like a story you didn't want to end? Your words keep these stories alive, and who knows, the next one might be inspired by you. Book sparkles.